Hi everyone, welcome to the flip lesson on how to factor trinomials when a is equal to 1. As you watch this video, I encourage you to pause it as many times as you need and rewind it as many times as you need in order to learn the content. I also encourage you to take notes on what you see. Before I show you on how to factor a trinomial when a is equal to 1, which I'll explain in a little bit, we have to review a couple topics first. The first topic we need to review is the standard form of what's called a trinomial. A trinomial is a polynomial that has three terms. And when we have a trinomial, its standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. Now don't let all the variables confuse you. All a is a placeholder for the coefficient of x squared, or whatever variable we're dealing with. It's the coefficient of the variable squared. The value of b, or plus b, its sign does make a difference, is always the coefficient of x, or whatever variable we're dealing with. And c is the constant. So whenever we have a trinomial, we have three terms. Usually we have a variable squared, we have a variable by itself, and then we have the constant. A, b, and c are just placeholders for what those coefficients and constants are. The second topic I'm going to review quickly is how to multiply binomials, and in class, you probably learned a term called FOIL. Remember that FOIL is simply a short way of saying the distributive property. What it means is you're multiplying the first terms, then the outside or outer terms, then the inside or inner terms, and then the last terms. So in my example here, I'm multiplying x minus 4 times x plus 6. My first terms are x and x. When I multiply x and x, that gives me x squared. My outer terms are x and positive 6. That gives me positive 6x. My inner terms are negative 4 and x, giving me negative 4x. And my last terms are negative 4 and 6, which gives me negative 24. Now what happens is a lot of the times when you multiply two binomials, two of the terms end up being able to be combined. And you can see here, the two middle terms, 6x and negative 4x, are like terms, which means you can combine them. And what that gives me as a final simplified result is x squared plus 2x minus 24. So here's what that leads us to. If you look at my trinomial there, my answer, which is, again, that here, I want you to think about what the values of a, b, and c are. In this example, the value of a is 1. It's the number in front of x squared. The value of b is positive 2. And the value of c is negative 24. So I want you to see if you notice any patterns there. And if you see it, that's great. But if you didn't, here's what the pattern is. If you take negative 4 and positive 6, when you multiply them, you get negative 24, which is the value of c. And if you add them, you get 2, which is the value of b. So the conclusion that we can get from that is that if we can start, or if we start with a trinomial such as x squared plus 2x minus 24, then we can go backwards and get x minus 4 times x plus 6. And that's called factoring. It's when you break something into smaller parts. So what I'm going to show you how to do right now is how to factor a trinomial when that leading coefficient, that value of a, is 1. So here's what we do. The first step is that we have to make sure that a is equal to 1 for these steps to work. Otherwise, they are different steps that come into play. In our example here, we want to factor x squared plus 2x minus 24, which is the answer we got from the last problem. That means that when we factor it, we should get the results that we started with. Since a is equal to 1, we can proceed. Step 2 is to open up a double bubble. All that is a trick. It means open up 2 sets of parentheses, and you're going to create 2 binomials here. So now that we have that opened up, steps 3 and 4 are what give us our answer. The first thing we have to make sure is that the first term in each binomial multiplies to get the first term in the trinomial. So what that means is that what we put here and here has to multiply to x squared. Well, the only 2 things that multiply to x squared are x and x. And that takes care of step 3. Step 4 is in bold because that is the hardest part for people. What you now need to do is consider the rest of the terms that fill up those binomials. You have to make sure that what you put inside those parentheses multiplies to c. In this case, c is negative 24, and they have to add to b, which in this case is 2, positive 2. So, what I do is I think about what numbers do I know that multiply to negative 24. So I make a list, and sometimes this can help. So I'm going to make my factors of negative 24. And as I write them, I think about, do they multiply to 2? Sorry, do they add up to 2? They should multiply to negative 24 and add up to 2. So let's start with some that we know. How about negative 12 times 2? Well, I know negative 12 times 2 is negative 24, but negative 12 plus 2 is negative 10. So those don't work. How about 12 and negative 2? They multiply to negative 24, but they add up to positive 10. So those don't work. How about 8 and negative 3? They also multiply to negative 24, but they add up to 5. That won't work either. Now we can try negative 8 and positive 3. They multiply to negative 24, but they add up to negative 5. So that doesn't work. So we're still searching for those 2 numbers. Let's try negative 6 and 4. If I multiply negative 6 and 4, I get negative 24, but they add up to negative 2, not positive 2. But I'm close. I have the number right, but not the sign. So that means I just have to switch the signs with the numbers that I chose. So if I try 6 and negative 4, those multiply to negative 24, and they also add up to 2. When you find those 2 numbers that multiply to c and add up to b, all you do is you fill up the binomials with those numbers. So one of them I'm going to put positive 6, and in the other one I'm going to put negative 4. And you could put negative 4 in the first one and 6 in the second one if you want to. It doesn't make a difference. So you can see that that's the same 2 binomials that I started with in the previous problem. Okay? So what I want you to try now that you have those steps and you saw that example, I would like you to pause the video and try to factor m squared minus 4m plus 3. So now that you've tried that, let's review what the answer comes out to. Well, the value a is 1, so that's good. That's what I need. Remember, step 1 is to make sure a is equal to 1. Unless, if it's not 1, then these steps don't work. Now you're going to open up that double bubble. And remember that the first term in each binomial has to multiply to the first term in the trinomial. So my first term is m squared. And all I know that multiplies to m squared is m and m. But now I have to find 2 factors of 3 that also add up to negative 4. Well, 3 really only has 2 factors, right? You're thinking 3 and 1. But you guys have to remember that a positive number also has 2 negative factors, because a negative times a negative gives you a positive. So I start with 3 and 1, and I know that that multiplies to 3, but they add up to 4. So that doesn't work. But what about negative 3 and negative 1? They multiply to positive 3, and they also add up to negative 4. So all I need to do is put minus 3 in one, and minus 1 in the other, and that's my factored answer. So now that you have it factored, what I would recommend doing afterwards is just checking quickly. And the way we check is by using the distributive property, or as you know it, FOIL. You multiply m times m to give you m squared. This is your check. Then you multiply m times negative 1 to give you negative 1m. Then you multiply negative 3 in m to get negative 3m. And then you lastly multiply negative 3 in 1 to get positive 3. And then you combine the two terms in the middle, negative 1m and negative 3m, and you get m squared minus 4m plus 3, which is exactly what you started with. If you get what you started with, then you've done it correctly. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. I encourage you again to go back and rewatch it as many times as you need to. Make sure you copy notes. Thank you for watching.